Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
At the very end of P Company, I was given my maroon beret. I took off my green hat that we wear, I put it in my pocket, and I found that piece of paper folded up. It was a little bit worn, and I have that framed on my wall in my living room because I cannot stress how much that was like an epiphany for me, in that if I was strong, somebody would be inspired.
Today's episode is a fascinating conversation with a remarkable woman, Major Rosie Wild. Rosie is a British Army officer and professional athlete who, following major injuries and a knee operation, went on to win the Sword of Honour at Sandhurst, the first woman to do so since men and women were integrated into the same platoons. In 2020, Rosie then became the first woman in history to pass the pre-parachute selection course, P Company, qualifying to serve in the airborne forces at 16 Air Assault Brigade, and where she deployed on numerous operations, including the evacuation of personnel from Kabul. Rosie is an accomplished and competitive triathlete, and after she came 15th in the London Marathon and 2nd at Ironman Copenhagen, the British Army started supporting her in training and racing as a professional triathlete. In September 2024, Rosie competed in the Ironman World Championships, where out of a field of almost 1,400, she placed 30th. In our conversation, Rosie shares why she isn't lit up by goals, how she uses complacency, and why winning has become for her all about being willing to lose. So, Rosie, how are you? Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, actually. And I have been looking at all of the many things that you have done in your relatively short life, I would say, things that I would say most of us would call extraordinary. Would you say that you are a pressure seeker?
My immediate response to that would be no, because I don't think of myself as going out. I don't actively go and seek these things, but I think retrospectively I look back and think maybe it's just in my veins, or maybe it's in my upbringing, or maybe it is something I do kind of naturally. But I'm not, in the most base form, I'm not an adrenaline junkie, so I'm not always seeking challenges like that. But I think there's probably this deep-rooted desire in me just to always just have that little bit of pressure put on me to make myself, just give myself that drive or that motivation.
Yeah. And has that always been the case, would you say?
I think so. And again, it's not something that I could only talk about it in hindsight. But yeah, I think even if I look back to my time at school, I was like that. I was trying to be on the athletics team, racing for the older years. I wanted to be on the hockey team. I wanted to always do better. And that is, in doing better, you are putting pressure on yourself. So
yeah. And that's an interesting way around. You're saying by doing better, you're putting pressure on yourself. It's almost which comes first. Do you create the pressure so that you can do better? Or do you say to yourself, actually, I want to be better, so therefore I create the pressure? What do you do? I think
you create the pressure. I think that when you want to be better, I think it's a proactive thing. To me, a lot of pressure is proactive in that it's very easy to sit and be complacent and have no pressure in your life. Obviously there are external pressures, but I think when it comes to success and ambition and the like, I think the only way you can achieve that is by self-induced pressure and by seeking that out, because it's not going to come to you. None of this, like success, will not just come to you naturally. You've got to go looking for it, and with it comes pressure and effort and determination and the like.
Yeah. And you, when we spoke in preparation for this, you were saying that you're having a year out of the army and training for with very strong athletes it's Ironman, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Say more. What took you, why did you do that?
So, well, I'm still in the army, and that kind of plays a part in the pressure, in that the army is still supporting me this year.
Right.
But the job role I'm in is elite sports person. So I think the pressure that I'm putting myself there is that I'm representing the army. I wear their kit. I talk to Soldier magazine after races. I'm approached by so many different people asking about the army and the like. And I'm putting myself out there with army written all over me, as a representative. And so I think there's your pressure in itself, in that you can't just be the little grey person doing your race in a full black suit. I'm doing it in bright red and army written everywhere, because I've kind of willingly put myself out there, on the sort of world stage. I think why I did it, and because I was under pressure at work, it's a really interesting dichotomy, I think, because the job roles that I was doing and the job role I will be doing and how I'm doing in my career trajectory, I'm doing really, really well. And I am sort of, promoted first time, the only person of my cohort that did. And so I am already on this pathway that I've chosen to completely detour off.
Yeah.
Why? Well, whilst that pathway is high pressure and difficult and I've worked hard, blah, 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 I have felt that there has been a complacency in my character that I didn't sit that well with me. And actually, I felt like I needed something else to give me pressure. I wasn't quite getting the stimulus I wanted from the work pressures. And I think I could see myself falling into some complacent habits. And I think this opportunity sort of presented itself. And I thought, well, that's a fantastic way for me to be humbled, remind myself what it is to work really hard, and get a bit of extra drive in me, hopefully with the idea that I go back to work with this sort of feeling of, right, I remember what it feels like to be at the bottom or to be struggling with something. Now I can apply that to my next job role.
Right. Gosh, that's so interesting to feel almost complacent in something that is pretty extraordinary to the majority of us.
Well, horses for courses, because I'm sure there are so many other jobs where I think, well, I couldn't do that and I couldn't do that, and other people would breeze through it. But I think I am quite proud of myself for having the self-awareness that I wasn't giving 100% in a job that deserves me to give 100%. And I think I probably needed to step back from it to firstly see how much I love it, because this year away I've absolutely loved this year away, but I can't help but be so proud when I talk about the army, or when I go and I wear the army kit, or someone comes and asks me a question about the military. I'm so engaging, and I'm so positive about the army, and I'm almost surprised myself. I knew I loved the job, but actually when it came to somebody coming up to me and saying, oh, I'm thinking about joining, and me sort of lighting up and having just great things to say about the army, I think it's been a really, really good experience for me to reflect on the army itself and my life and the challenges I've given myself.
Yeah. When you look at what you've achieved, well, particularly with P Company, I mean, that's the thing that stands out, isn't it? When you read about you, it's like you're the first woman to have achieved that, how did you stick with something that looked on paper almost impossible, or hadn't been achieved before? I see so many people, and many people that I work with, and myself included, if the challenge feels too big, like, why would you begin? So I'm interested in what do you do when you see something like that, when you see an opportunity like that? Talk us through what you actually do.
One thing that always stands out to me is I remember messaging my line manager at the time, so my battery commander, he's sort of 10 years senior to me. I remember messaging him when I was on the course. He asked me how it was going or something. And I sent him a message that said, I'm really excited to do something I'm probably going to fail at. I probably didn't think a huge amount about it at the time, but the more I reflect on that, the more I realise how my attitude was, in that I didn't fear failure. I was going on this course that everybody said I would, that women didn't pass, that 27% of men pass. So
yes,
it's an unlikely pass. But I was really excited to find my physical and or psychological limits in a controlled and safe environment. Yes, it's not very nice, but I was just quite excited because I felt like, and maybe people would disagree, I felt like a lot of the stuff I'd done in my life, I'd always been able to pass, and I'd never failed. I felt like I'd never actually achieved failure, and I didn't know what it felt like. And I was actually really excited to say, I might not pass this, but at the end, I can walk away and say, well, I know what my limits are, and either I can accept them or I can improve on them.
Wow. I'm just so struck by a couple of sentences that you used in that description. And one of those, I sort of welcomed failure. Like I was looking forward to failure. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that to me, Rosie, ever. I'm looking forward to failing. Is that because the expectations were so low for you actually succeeding? Or was it just genuinely the desire to get into that space of failure?
I don't think the expectations were low. I do. So one thing I actually reflect on, so I can talk about this. I like failure. I want to seek failure. I also recognize, if I reflect on that actually that could be quite a negative way of thinking, in that if you go in something with low expectations, are you ever going to push yourself to your real limits? Because you're going to always think, whatever, I'll give it a go. I'm quite like that with triathlon. I'm quite blasé. Oh, you know what? I'm on the start line. It'll be fun. Actually, I'm trying to reframe myself to go in and say, I want to win, and not be as okay with failure. But I guess it's also your definition of what failure is. Is right. Failure not winning, not passing, or is failure not achieving what your best is? So you could come last I've got the World Championships next week. I could come last, very likely come at the very bottom of the field. To some, that will be a failure. To me, if I've ticked off my best swim and I've done the best power I could on the bike and I've done my fastest ever run, I do not care what I come. It will be a success if I achieve my best. Right. That to me is not failing. So it's also reframing what you consider failure to be.
Yes. Well, when we spoke before, which I found really interesting, and you're touching on it here, I think, is that intrinsic versus extrinsic sense of success. Yeah. And I think most of us, me included, are very boundaried or certainly, well, are certainly buoyed by external validation or extrinsic, something that comes back at you. Yeah. But what struck me when we were talking earlier on, I'd love you to talk more about this. It feels like you're very intrinsically led. I don't really know what I can put it down to, but I am totally intrinsically led. I just thinking about it now, I just think, I guess when you get to 80 years old, nobody around you is going to care that you have medals or trophies on your shelf, but you will care what you've achieved. And the only person that can actually measure that success is you. And so I guess intrinsic motivation is sort of a really, really long-term way of achieving your best. For COVID, for example, during COVID, when we couldn't race at all, there weren't any triathlons or running races on, I still trained exactly the same, because for me, I wanted to go to bed better than I woke up. And that wasn't measurable by first place on a podium, a trophy, a medal. That was measured by me and myself and my own standards. I didn't realise necessarily at the time, but if I look back, I can reflect and say, yeah, that's how I've lived my whole life. It's not about showing the world I'm the best. It's about showing myself I'm the best, so that when I go to sleep each night, I can say, have I done something today that has made me better? Yes, I have. I mean, I think that's such a wonderful way to approach each day. And I'm very intrigued as to, is your measurement physical? Is your measurement on the whole a physical success? What is it? How do you measure? What is it that you're measuring?
I don't know if it's quantifiable. It's not physical. So I could go on a run. I could do my best ever run, and I could say, okay, I achieved this pace or this time.
Yeah.
But no, for me, it's a feeling. It's just knowing that you've given your best to the day. It's knowing that you did something that added value that day to your life, adding value to your life, let's say. And yeah, that's not measurable. That's wafty. But that's more important to me than nailing a goal. Like I could have a really terrible day. I don't know, have an argument with somebody, have an encounter with someone on the street that's not very nice. I could have all these bad things happen, and I could go on a run and I could get my best ever time. I might still go to bed thinking, I don't know if today was a good day, because I could have engaged with that person differently. I could have responded nicely. I could have maybe de-escalated what happened there. I could have done things better. Who cares about the actual run? It's my interactions, it's my achievements, again, intrinsically in the day, as opposed to, did I lift heavy today? Tick.
Yeah. I love that. And I love it because you're using a feeling, which is an intrinsic understanding with yourself. Fascinating that you say, I'm not really lit up by goals. Isn't that in some way a goal? Understanding that the feeling has been reached.
Yeah, I suppose that is. And I think a lot of people could probably also argue that if I'm not driven by goals, and yet I want to be better when I go to bed at the end of the day, then am I also just moving goalposts? Am I going to go, yeah, I did that. Okay, that's good. There'll be a lot of people who like to quantify things who will say, well, that's too wafty for me, because how do I actually know? If you're just going to measure it on a feeling, how do you actually know? Or are you going to start just lowering that standard every day until you go, do you know what? I woke up today. I put my pajamas under the pillow today. I did something little. That's where you hold yourself accountable. Yeah. So I suppose, yes, I do have goals, but again, they're still intrinsic. They're still, alien apocalypse, and it could be just me here. I still would have those same goals. They're not up for debate with anyone else. They're just me and mine.
So how do you move yourself, Rosie, out of, because I'm sure, you're human, for God's sake. You must have had days when it's not easy, or things happen that are not easy, like all of us. How do you move yourself from one state to another?
I'm actually not sure how to answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, this is in a way the basis of why I want to have these conversations, because it's trying to turn something that is theoretical into something that is a practice. But how do you set yourself up for a good day? How do you set yourself up in the morning? How do you move? These little things, I think, have probably been so much a part of the way that you operate that in a way it becomes out of your conscious awareness. And what I'm asking you is to sort of bring it into something that maybe someone listening to this and me talking to you will think, God, I've never even tried thinking that. I mean, I'm already hearing you have some really strong, positive ways of talking to yourself. Yeah. Which radiate from this conversation. How do you notice that you're doing one thing and then you shift it into something else? How do you turn pressure into such an energizing force for yourself?
Well, I think that part of it is you've got to do what you love, and doing what you love makes everything a lot easier. It's not as hard work. And therefore waking up and going on a run or going on a bike ride or going on a swim is, it's not something I have to do. It's something I want to do, or something I get to do. And that's a big thing, actually. Just a few people I'm staying with and training with at the moment, we talk about when we've been injured before and we haven't been able to run. Now, when I go on a run, even if I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a really long, difficult run, I think, but I get to run. Yes. And there are times where I haven't been able to do that. And I always bank those feelings when you haven't been able to do something, to go, do you know what? I get to get out and go. Now, I suppose, I think if we talk about my motivation always being on, actually, since I've been on this year, one thing I've struggled with is routine, because I was very, very good at having a full-time job and getting up super early, training, going to the job, training at lunch, going back to my job and then training in the evening, I was really good at getting everything in. I'm one of those people where you say if you've got a task that needs doing, give it to a busy person.
Yeah.
I was very good at that. The minute I then didn't have that work, I really struggled to find structure, because I didn't have to get up at 5, and I suddenly was, do you know, I'll get up at 7, and then I'd sit there and I'd do something, and I'd go, I'll have another coffee, and then suddenly I was going on my run at 9 o'clock, and then suddenly having to compact everything because I didn't have the time. So I have struggled in that sense, finding structure, and the way I've changed that this year, I've put into the diaries, if it's a meeting, my run, or my bike ride, or I don't know, lunch, or going to speak to a friend or speak to a work colleague or something. In fact, I've got here, like my training plan for the next 3 days. Right. And it's on a whiteboard, and I've put time to it, so that even though, I could go at any time of day, if I put the times on there and I put what dinner is and what time dinner is, then it will happen. And this is definitely something I've bought into this year, is that in my diary, I put things like sit on the sofa and watch television, or stretch or rest or something, because I think those of your listeners who are in really high pressure, difficult, busy jobs, they will find all the time in the world for the stuff they like doing, but the stuff that they're not as bothered about, they will never find the time unless you put it in your diary. So if you're not very good at keeping in touch with your friends, or keeping in touch with your godchildren or your auntie, your uncle or something, put it in your diary as if it's a meeting, and then it becomes a part of the structure in your day. And this has really worked for me this year, making sure that I prioritize in a diary and put it in there, so that I'm holding myself accountable. Nobody else is looking at that, and I'm not standing anyone up if I don't make those timings. But even if it's just reply to your WhatsApps, because there's plenty of friends that have sent me messages that I just forget to reply to for 3 or 4 weeks. I put in my diary, reply, and then I'll get it done, and it's part of my day.
Yes. It's backing yourself, isn't it? It's a pact with yourself, I'm hearing there.
Yes. It's like writing a to-do list, and we all write to-do lists where we write things we've already done so that we can cross them off. We're very guilty of that as well.
I want to go back to something Rosie said earlier about how she uses the phrase, I get to. When I first came across this phrase through Seth Godin, I remember thinking, wow, such a simple reframe, and yet a profound reminder of how we get to choose the way we look at anything. As I speak, I'm wearing a boot on my left foot due to an accident, and it actually needs 8 weeks of recovery. I can find myself getting very frustrated about this, that I can't exercise or go for walks with the dog, for example. And yes, it has created a lot of reorganisation in my life, as well as quite a bit of worry and pain and inconvenience. However, remembering that I still get to walk, albeit in a boot, I still get to do my work, albeit mostly virtually. I also get to be still and to be quiet and learn how to go slower. I get to observe the pace that I usually run my life at. And what's brilliant, in my view, about this reframe is that it puts an instant focus on gratitude. Whatever the pressure, whether it's health, relationship, or work-related, when we turn the sentence from, I've got to do this, to, I get to do this, it provides us with the gift of perspective. Like with my foot, we can't always control events, but we can always choose our outlook. What we focus on shapes how we feel. And what Rosie is reminding us of is that whatever the pressure, gratitude comes from knowing that things could be worse, and that remembering to reframe I've got to into I get to can be a linguistic fast track to get us there. The other thing that Rosie's touching on here that I want to highlight is the power of being specific. As she was speaking, I was reminded of a 3-group experiment that was conducted in 1999, where the first group of participants was asked to commit to exercise once a week. The second group was asked to exercise once a week, but on a specific day. And the third group was asked to commit to exercising once a week at a specific time, on a specific day, in a specific location, with a set of exercises to do too. In the first group, 29% completed the set task. In group 2, 39% did. And in the third group, that figure more than doubled to 91%. When we have little energy, or when the pressure feels full on, Being very specific in advance about when you're going to do something and for how long maximises the likelihood of you committing to it. I find this especially true for clients who often neglect themselves when the pressure is on and struggle to commit to the things that they know are good for them, like exercise or being with friends or simply switching off. So as you listen to this, what do you know, deep down, requires you to be more specific with the details of when and for how long in order to boost your commitment?
What's it like to be a woman in the army in terms of pressure?
I think there's probably a lot more pressure than any of us recognised or care to admit. That's not a pressure you can say this is what the pressure is, but there is always something, whether it's self-induced or a little bit traditional historic. There is always going to be an extra pressure with being the different person in the room. Walking into a meeting of 40 men and being the only woman there, it's not, and we can talk about framing this, it's not necessarily a problem and it's not a negative, but it is a pressure. And a lot of that is self-induced because we think, we read all the time about how it's difficult being a woman, and it's difficult being a woman in a high-pressured environment surrounded by men. So we've already got that going in our heads. And then we walk in, and then the men who've also read these articles and know that these movements are happening are also thinking, oh, either poor her, she's the only woman here, or she's the only woman in here, like there aren't as many women that do X, Y, Z, should we listen to her? And then suddenly everybody's probably overthinking it, and you're adding these pressures that never needed to exist into this room, and creating quite a toxic environment for yourself and for others.
So what do you do?
I completely reframe it. And this comes from, naively, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, what's it like being a woman in the army? I would have a stock answer, which was, it's like being a man in the army, but I've got long hair. And that would be it. And that's genuinely what I thought. I never recognised or noticed or cared about being a woman. Then I passed P Company, and you would think I almost was going to carry on like that, in that, hey, look, I've just done it. Like, being a woman doesn't mean anything. I just went and did it. And I did used to speak like that. I did very much used to say, like, feminism in action, guys, don't talk about it, go and do it.
Yeah.
And then I started talking at recruiting events, started having people ask me questions about fitness or P Company or the army. And then I also had my friends engaging with me, my friends who had probably had different had different experiences to me in the army. I started to recognise that whilst they weren't my truths, they were really, really valid. And I had a friend who was quite vocal about the difficulties of being a woman in the army. And I had always been a bit like, if you just worked harder, or you just got fitter, or you just cracked on. And, it's not a good thing of me to have been like that. But she did say to me, we have things to say. The problem is the platform for us to say them, it's not very high. It's very difficult for us to get this across without sounding whiny, without sounding difficult, without sounding like we're complaining. And that's when I recognised that I had the platform. So I put myself in a position where I could stand amongst men as an equal, because when it came to P Company, I passed the course, I hit the targets, I reached the standards. There was no question of it. It wasn't a subjective pass. I had to hit the standards. So there was no question of it. So when I then got to work in that environment, I unwittingly had given myself a platform from which I had a voice that actually people did listen to. And the responsibility I therefore realised I had of transferring and passing on messages from people who are much more verbose, much more emotionally in tune than I was, I realised that I was probably the best way for them to get those points across. And that's when I started taking more seriously listening to other people's stories and understanding that being a woman in the army is different. It is different. However, what I try and do every time I do work with any unit, any meeting, whatever I'm doing, is instead of walking into that room and thinking I'm the only woman in this room, I walk in and think I get to be the only woman in this room. What is my unique selling point of these 40 white men, all with similar backgrounds, who all went to Sandhurst, all same sort of career? What's my USP is that I'm a woman. So if you walk into that room and reframe, rather than, oh God, I'm the only woman in here, as great, guess what? I'm the only woman in this room. I've got a voice that's going to sound different to these 40 people. Suddenly you walk in, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You walk in with a bit more of a, yeah, this is great. I get to do this. Like I was saying with, I get to go running. Opportunities. You're flipping what could be an obstacle into an opportunity.
Yeah. Do you think, though, Rosie, that platform has been earned because of what you've achieved? Like, would that happen had you not become the first woman in P Company?
I think I always had that attitude, but I recognise that it had to happen. And it's unfortunate to say that, I think, because you could look at that cynically and say, but that's unfair that you had to earn that respect, because the men didn't have to earn that respect. They could walk in and have a voice. Okay, fine. I'll agree with that. It's unfair. The one thing that I would take on my shoulders is that I did the course, I passed it, I broke the barrier, and now women can walk in and just have a voice. So I think what actually it's when I was talking earlier about action over words, I think in some cases for us to get there, we just need those first people to break the barrier, and then it's just fine. So yes, it was unfair on me. I had to do that, to walk in, to have that voice. But I do believe that now we've proved the point. We've made it clear. Well, it doesn't matter. Women can pass the course, get over it. And now women can walk into the room and they don't have to earn the respect every single time. It's not fair. But I think that as women, if we take it amongst ourselves, one of us puts our hands up and puts our head above the parapet and says that I'll go first.
Yeah.
And then once they've gone, as long as we bring each other with us, that's the most important thing. Because when I passed the course, actually, it took 3 and a bit years for the second woman to pass.
Right.
Funnily enough, a lot of men would say, oh, I bet you don't want anyone to pass. You like being the only woman. And I kept thinking, no, that's the opposite.
How interesting.
If nobody else passes, then I'm an anomaly, and it just goes into history as this one-off.
Yeah.
When the next girl passed, honestly, I was more ecstatic than when I passed, because I felt like this is it. This has proven the point. I blazed this trail, as they would say, and somebody's gone and walked. Somebody's followed it. Hats off to her, because that's a big task for her to take as well. Being like, okay, well, I'll give it a go. So I think that I sort of proved it can happen, and she's now proved that it can happen in longevity, for eternity. It can continue to happen. And that was more important to me, that we had the next girl pass, because she then passed, and then we've had, I think, 3 or 4 girls in the year following her that then passed it. And I think that it's not like floodgates opening. It was a case of just the more you see it, the more it will happen. So absolutely. For me, that was the best thing to happen.
Yeah. And you know what's really ringing out as you're speaking is this whole strength of intrinsic motivation that you have that got you there in the first place. I'm so intrigued with this. As an ex-teacher, you very, very rarely see it in your classrooms, because most of the students are wanting your judgment either in an essay mark or, your response or something. But I remember... I've spoken about this before, but I remember one boy actually really just not remotely interested in anything, any mark I would give him. He had his own, as you called it, his own measure of whether he had done his best. And he went on to be very successful. But I just, if you're listening to this and you're feeling I am so dependent on validation externally in order to deal with pressure, what would you say to that? How would you start growing your internal belief?
I think this will link in. So there's a phrase that my friend told me once, and she was in the cycling team with me. And when we do road racing on bikes, if you've ever watched it, you ride in a big peloton, like a big pack of 50 women or something. Somebody sits in the front, somebody sits in the back. If you're on the front, you're doing all the work. If you're at the back, you're doing none of the work. Yeah. But it's all tactical. It's all tactical. So you've got some people who are really good sprinters. So they'll sit at the back, get pulled along, and then do a sprint finish to try and win. And then you've got some people who are domestiques who will sit on the front, they'll do all the work, but they will never win the race because they'll just tire out. But the point is they're trying to get their teammates to win. But my friend once told me this phrase. She said, in order to win the race, you've got to be willing to lose it. And I can never get that out of my head, because that to me is how I live. And I'm trying to link this to the intrinsic, in that in a bike race, you can either do an attack 5 kilometers from the end because you might not be a good sprinter, so I'm going to go early, and if nobody comes, then I'll win this race. Or you can do one 500, 200, 100 meters from the end, and you can just sprint, finish, and try and win it then. Whenever you choose to attack, you are doing it fully in the knowledge of the risk that if this doesn't stick, then, and you tire too quickly, the peloton will catch you, fly past you, and you're not even coming second, you're coming near the back. So when you make that attack, you're doing it willing to lose the race, because the only way you're going to win it is by doing an attack. Yeah. But you have to do it with the risk of knowing you could lose. Yeah. Now I'm a bit of a diesel engine on the bike. I can't do sprints, so I would always attack about 5 kilometers from the end, and I'd go, and sometimes I would win the race. I'd head off, full pelt. Nobody will follow me because they think she's going to tire. She's never going to hold that. And then sometimes that would happen, and I would win the race because no one would go with me. Sometimes I would attack, and I'd hold it for 3 or 4 kilometers. Somebody would say, I'm not having this. They would then attack, catch me, and just as they'd get to me, I'd think, right, I've spent everything now, and they've sat on my wheel, they've got some energy, they would go. But I would always finish the race, whether I've won it or come 30th, I would always finish the race feeling like a winner if I had made an attack. Because if I hadn't made an attack and I just sat in the peloton and let everyone else do the attacking, you still wouldn't win. Yeah. So somebody at some point has got to risk losing the race in order to win it. I do think about that in the way I frame a lot of the stuff I do, in that you're never, ever going to win unless you're willing to lose. So even those people that are extrinsically motivated, that want to come first, that want to win the running race or want to be the best salesperson in their job or something, the only way that they're going to achieve that is at some point risking losing. Yeah. So whether that's, if you work in sales, you might say, right, how am I going to get that extra 10% on the people around me, my peers? I need to find a new strategy, a new way of doing this. And you might do it and it's fantastic, great achievement. You boost your sales 20%. You might do it and it might not work. And that could be a detriment to what you do. But that's the way that you're going to achieve and improve. If you do nothing and you stay the same, then you're not going to improve. You're not going to win. Yeah. And that's complacency. I think if we go back to me talking about my job and my work, that I'm talking about, it's not being complacent in that you're being average. It's this self-complacency in that you could stay the same, but you will never improve over time. And at some point, I just think that the best people in the world, those that are the highest performers, the Olympians, the best in business and stuff, they have all made decisions along the way where they have risked losing, whether that's actual monetary losses, profit losses, or just themselves, just their own achievements and what they get. They are willing to risk that. And it's that phrase, if you want to win the race, you've got to be willing to lose it.
Yeah.
This feels like a real insight into how Rosie became the first ever woman to achieve P Company, A few weeks ago, when I spoke to John Amaechi, we discussed the energetic difference that we notice between leaders and teams who are playing to win and those playing not to lose. But hearing Rosie say, in order to win, you have to be willing to lose, is making me so curious about what the energetic difference is between playing not to lose and being willing to lose. I don't know about you, but it feels like being willing to lose invites boldness, daring, and risk, perhaps, that you might not bring if you were only thinking about winning. Many people in this podcast have shared that one strategy which really helps them face high challenge or pressure situations is to ask themselves, what's the worst that can happen? Being willing to lose, for me, has a similar feeling. By facing the worst outcome firmly in the mirror, we are then more able to take a bolder or braver step towards what we want. It's really got me thinking about how a sentence like being willing to lose can almost release you from fear and give you an ease to being bolder than ever. Whether you're in sport or not, and so much more than playing not to lose, which feels tight and contracted and slightly desperate. I wonder what relevance this has in other areas of life where we are feeling, as Rosie says, complacent. I dig more into this conversation with Rosie.
It reminds me actually of a phrase that a mentor that I work with says, you've got to care so much you don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Which I have found really helpful because it sort of gives an ease to the sprint and the effort that it takes. It also reminds me of the difference between playing in your excellent zone versus your genius zone. It's almost like what's going to take you out of just being excellent, but actually being completely phenomenal.
Yeah.
There is this gap which you can see, but it's whether you're prepared to risk going into it.
And you know, some people are lucky enough, I guess, that in life they've learned that early. Some people, I think, they've maybe never experienced the discomfort of that zone. And so there is a fear about stepping into it. We certainly see it with soldiers. So we have some more junior soldiers that come through the army now who physically are very capable. And, you know, well, they're young 18-year-old men who are 6 foot and strong, and they should be really fit. But they really struggle with their fitness. And this is not scientific, but I've put it down to they hit that first wall and they think that is their limit. They don't realise that putting up with that discomfort for a little bit longer, you break through and you're in a new zone now, whether that's into your genius zone or that's just into the second wind you get when you're running. Maybe I was lucky when I was younger in that I was tested in some way that made me work that little bit harder and realise that you can just step into the next category or the next zone. And it's uncomfortable for a little bit, but the rewards are worth it. And I think that's probably something that we could educate younger people better. I mean, I look at it from a physical perspective. I guess growing up, the front door was opened. You were chucked outside and you played outside all day and you were running around and you were playing catch and you were always out of breath and the like. Now it's different. That doesn't happen as much. People are on the PlayStation or people are on their phones and you don't have that same competitive physical drive. But I think that's an educational point that I think that I imagine you're going to see it in businesses where people are quite happy just coasting along because they don't know how to get out of that uncomfortable step into the next zone.
Yes, but I also love what the connection you're making between the physical and the mental, the body and the mind are so interrelated. And whilst, you know, you could listen to this podcast and think, well, that's all about physical strength and endurance but actually it's not. You know, you're linking it all the time with how the physical moves the mental capacity of what's possible, you know, opening your range, opening your capacity for dealing with difficulty. My business partner is an ex-Royal Marine, and he launched with me the second series. And he said, you need to ask yourself, is this horrible or is it lethal? And there's a difference for him between, yes, this is horrible. It's not very nice. But it's not lethal.
Yeah. And
for him, it was always about whether it was lethal.
Yeah.
Working in that sort of war capacity.
Absolutely. It's all they're all metaphors for each other.
Yes. Yeah.
you could also look at somebody not in business and not in exercise. Let's say,
yes.
You're a stay-at-home parent. Are you at capacity because you're busy? Like there's a are you busy or are you burning too many candles? There's burnout.
Yes.
So you could say, if you actually reflected on it, am I busy and do I just need to schedule and write down everything that needs doing and then just tick each thing off as I go, be more methodical with it? Or am I actually at burnout? And I think it's the same with physical, it's the same with the lethality. It's just a case you need to be self-aware, and you need to have that honest self-judgment of, okay, hang on a second, am I actually at burnout, or am I just being inefficient, or could I do X, Y, and Z better? Could I ask for support here? Could I do this? Are there things that I could do to improve my lot, rather than letting myself think that even though I'm at 70%, thinking I'm at 120%, and I've got too much on. And I think it's, maybe that's easy to talk about. It's easy to say, do you know what, just reflect on it and then work out a schedule. Someone else might say, well, that's really easy to say when you ride a bike for a living. And you might say, we've got stuff on. But I do think that there is a matter of perspective where you really need that self-awareness of, are you busy, or could you be more efficient with what you have in terms of the time and what you do with it? I remember a course I went on with work. I remember very early in my career, and the directing staff, they said, who thinks they're overworked in their job at the moment? And then there was a room of 10 of us. I think about 5 people said they were overworked. And I remember thinking, we're junior officers. We are not overworked. I don't think we even could be overworked. We're given a lot, and we have a lot of time, and we have a lot of fun in what we do. And when the guys are explaining how busy they were, I felt like it was a case of, you think you're busy because you're being inefficient. When you've said that you were working for an hour here, were you actually stopping and having a coffee and chit-chatting and then texting somebody and then doing this? Or were you getting your work done in that hour? And I think that the only way you can actually improve that or be honest about that is looking and reflecting on yourself in total isolation and honesty, because I think a lot of people would be unwilling to admit that actually they waste a lot of time sitting on their phone or looking out the window or going and having another coffee or a cigarette or something.
Yeah. And that's back to your intrinsic, though. It's back to your intrinsic motivation, isn't it? That you're asking yourself. The self-awareness is asking you to do that. And
there's been days in my life where I've said, okay, today I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Whether that's I'll go to work today, I'll come back and I'll make sure I clean the flat top to bottom. I get to 8 p.m. and I've made more of a mess, if anything. And I think, God, I've had no time today. And then I think, actually, hang on. I got back from work. I sat on the sofa for about 20 minutes and I said, okay, I'll wait 20 minutes and then I'll start tidying. I didn't. I then started messaging my friend, and then I rung someone, and then I went, I'll quickly do that email. And then I'd done this, and I've been distracted by all these things. If I put it in my diary, an hour of cleaning, or if I'd just been honest about it, then I would say, no, Rosie, you weren't overworked today. You procrastinated and you got to the end of the day in a worse place. Like, you've got to do better tomorrow. I guess that's how I mean, again, with hindsight, look, I don't sort of live my life on this rigid schedule where I say, right, I'm tidying up now, right, I'm doing this now. But I do think it's something I have learned.
Yeah. How do you recover?
With difficulty. And I've learned a lot this year about how to recover, because I think if I'm honest, the way I used to think I was recovering would be keeping myself super busy and going and doing loads of stuff and filling my diary up, and actually never actually just putting in the diary, do nothing. I'm not very good at that. So I'm very keen on cryptic crosswords, and I love jigsaw puzzles. So I've started investing a lot more in them, in that I have a table in my house that has a jigsaw puzzle on it, and I have a cryptic crossword every day on the go. And instead of saying sit on the sofa and do nothing, I can't do that. I will sit at the table and do the jigsaw, or I will sit and do the crossword. And that's the only way I can force myself to recover, because it is, for me, it's a mind recovery. The jigsaw's a mind recovery. If I've been overworked with work stuff, the cryptic crossword, yeah, you're engaging your brain a bit, but let's say I need some rest because I've been out riding. That's sort of, it's like active recovery. It's my way of forcing myself to sit down and do that. But also seeing friends. I'm not very good at traveling and seeing all my friends. They're all over the UK, but now I try and prioritize putting that in the diary, because that is a rest, and that's a way of recovering, and that's being around good people and being around people that are outside of the world, outside of the army, outside of triathlon, who don't care about it. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to go and hang out. So I'll put that in, because that's as important as the training session or as the work is.
Yes. Interesting that that's been a point of real focus for you I mean, I see this a lot of very high achievers, is their ability to stop, rest, recover, whatever that means to them. You called it active recovery, just downtime, off. We call it in our business off. We're off. How do you create those moments of being off, and appreciate that that's sometimes where lots of great thinking comes from, or lots of other stuff comes from, which is not necessarily involved in action. And in terms of, like, I mean, I would say this because shed is something that matters to me: sleep, hydration, exercise, diet. A lot of that sits under people being able to deal with pressure, raise their game in pressure. And it's often the stuff that gets curtailed, particularly actually people's eating. I suppose for you, because it's so part of performance and strength, you take nutrition and diet very seriously, do you?
In terms of getting it in, yes. But in terms of what I take in, no. And that's partly to do with what the sport I do is endurance. And so it's a case of get the calories in however you can. I know there are some sports where you have to think about your weight and you have to think about what you can and can't have. Luckily, I don't have that with endurance sports. But it's when I thought about the goals I had for this year off, one of the main ones was, well, in fact, it was shed. Sleep and diet were the two big ones for me, because I now had the time to commit to those training sessions. So sleep is now a training session.
Great.
And so is diet, because before it was very much, I never ate breakfast, because I would get up really early, train, and then shower. And basically, while I'm still in the shower, be running to work to get there on time, never on time. And then coming back for dinner, deciding what's going to have for dinner. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Then suddenly getting home and going, well, I've got no time for that. Chuck that in the microwave, or I chuck that in the hob. I have the same thing every single day. Yeah. I'm still a bit of a creature of habit, but my goal to myself was take that part seriously, because putting in your diary, you've got a meeting today, or putting in your goals for the year, as in I want to make this much money, or I want to do this, or I want to achieve X, Y, Z. If you can put into your diary things like sleep, things like hydration, things like diet, you will see the overall improvement in yourself. And what's amazing about that is that there are no external factors. That's all on you. That's intrinsic, isn't it? Yeah. And you're the only person that can hold yourself accountable to how much sleep you've had, if you've eaten well, if you've hydrated well. But they're easy wins. They're the easiest wins of everything you're going to do in life. The amount of, let's say, if we're talking about pressure, all the pressure that you're going to get put on you by family pressure, life pressure, personal life, work, money, whatever. There's a lot of stuff in there that has variables, and there are things that will get in your way, that will cause dramas, that will cause problems that you don't know about. Getting 8 hours sleep a night, or eating a balanced meal, is something that you have control over at all times. And it's one where you don't really have excuses. You can't say, oh, do you know what? I only had 5 minutes, so I had to chuck that in the microwave. At some point in this week, you've had more than 5 minutes. You could have made something and then put in the microwave then. So you're still microwaving, but you're eating something that's got more nutrition. If adding an apple to your day is going to give you nutrition, not taking anything else away. So I think, for me, it's been holding myself accountable to that stuff that nobody has control over but me, And
Yes.
I have no excuse not to be better.
Yeah. All choices, aren't they? They're all choices about where you place your effort.
Yeah.
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 Brilliant, Rosie. Well, I ask every guest towards the end of a conversation if there were two things, and I'm sure you have many, but if there were two things that you would offer anyone listening to this podcast who wishes to be better under pressure, what would you offer them? What would be your first one?
I think my first one would be to be better under pressure would be every day. I've already said it a few times, deciding to go to sleep better than when you woke up. If you choose to have micro goals like that every single day, then when pressure comes that you're not ready for, or that is completely external and it's not self-induced, it's somebody else putting pressure on you. If you live your life putting yourself under minor pressures, then you will be able to manage those larger ones a lot better, because you know, well, each day I put myself under pressure to be better when I go to bed. So this external pressure that's coming onto me, I know how to tackle that. I know how to manage it. I know what the feeling is. I know that at the end of the day, I'll feel better. So go to bed better than when you woke up.
I love that. And I love it also because we always talk in our business around having what we call a pressure practice, because to be better under pressure, you need to have practiced it outside of pressure, so that when the pressure hits, it's much more well rehearsed, it's much more in your body. It's not a new thing that's going to knock you off completely. And in a way, that's what you've just said, I think, is just if you keep counting them and knowing that you're doing tiny little things that will make a difference.
It's counting the pennies and the pounds will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And my
second one, yeah.
I want to go for the easy one, which I've already mentioned, which is in order to win the race, you've got to be willing to lose the race. That can be my honourable mention for my two. My second one is more of an intrinsic one that I will quickly explain. I haven't brought it up yet, but when I was on P Company, I was under a huge amount of pressure, self-induced and external. There was all sorts of pressures that I felt like it was just everywhere. And I wasn't replying to messages. I wasn't replying to emails. I wasn't engaging with anyone around me because I just didn't know what to do in this ball of pressure. And I had this calendar where you rip a page off each day, just like a daily calendar. And it was called a happy thoughts calendar. It's not my sort of thing, but I had it. And each day I'd rip it off and it would give me a little phrase, live, laugh, love, or whatever. And I would usually just throw it in the bin, didn't care. On the first day of test week, so the final 5 days of P Company, I ripped it off and it was February the 19th, and it said, be strong, you never know who you are inspiring. And I was about to throw it in the bin, but I didn't. I reread it, reflected, and I realised that this was what everything I was doing was about. It was all these pressures, all these things around me, I was seeing them negatively. What they actually were inspiring and motivating things that were going to inspire me and things that I could be using to inspire others. I realized that me passing this course, you doing whatever it is you want to do in life, is not just about you and your achievement. It's about everyone that's going to come after. It's about everyone who might look in and say, oh, well, if she can do that, maybe I can do that. It doesn't have to be P Company, it can be anything else. But I realized that in actually tackling all these dark pressures that were on my head and getting through them, somebody somewhere might be inspired, do the same, and could fly past me and do way better, and we could just see great things happening in the world. And I folded that piece of paper up and I put it in my pocket, and it was only when at the very end of P Company I was given my maroon beret, I took off my green hat that we wear, I put it in my pocket, and I found that piece of paper folded up. It was a little bit worn, and I have that framed on my wall in my living room because I'm not into mantras or quotes or anything like that, but I cannot stress how much that was like an epiphany for me, in that if I was strong, somebody would be inspired. And that strength was under all these immense pressures, mostly self-induced, but me tackling them and managing them and getting through them, I believe means that I come and talk to you. It means that the next girl who passed the course does it because she's seen me pass the course. Something good will happen, and anybody can be inspired by somebody. It doesn't have to be that you're the first woman to do something. You could just be doing some micro goals that somebody sees you do. You could pick up rubbish on the street and somebody could see you and think, oh, do you know what, that's a good idea, I'll pick the next piece of rubbish up I see. It's just making the world a better place by being better. So my last one, I guess it's a very intrinsic feeling, and it's not necessarily about pressure, but it's be strong. You never know who you are inspiring.
Oh, what a brilliant way to end, Rosie. That's such a fabulous message, and it's made me a bit goosebumpy, actually. I mean, I felt it. You were back there in the way that you told it. So thank you so much. That's brilliant. It's been such a delight talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been really great actually unpicking that stuff, because a lot of it is things I don't necessarily actively think about. But when you ask the questions, I think, I mean, yeah, that's great. Why don't we talk more about that? And why don't we reflect on more on that? I think it's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.